And hello, everybody, and welcome to Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, and of course, Discord. If you want to join the Discord, the link is in my link tree, and we still have this goal of 175, unfortunately. So if you can, please hit up the goal, because I do these readings for free, and yeah, we've been at Orientalism since February. It is now August, and I hope to finish soon. This is another case of Walter Rodney, where we were on how Europe underdeveloped Africa for almost a full year. But that also included taking a month or two off for my health. But yeah, welcome, and I hope all of you are doing well. How is everybody doing? Yeah, I see it is Justin, my love, and Twister, aka Crystal, on TikTok. And if you join on Discord, obviously you can contribute directly to the conversation, either in the chat or on voice. So yeah, last week we left off with Gibbs' idea of Arab hostility or hatred towards the Jewish people, and his ideas of Mohammedanism. Hi, how are you doing, baby? And basically denouncing Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a prophet. So basically spreading lies about Islam and stoking the fires of already entrenched Islamophobia in the minds of Western people. So we follow on from that. We are on page 288 if you're following along with your book. Let's go. These crude ideas were supported, not contradicted, by the academic whose business is the study of the Arab Near East. It's worth noting, incidentally, that the Princeton event I referred to earlier took place at a university that prides itself on its Department of Near Eastern Studies, founded in 1927. So basically, this is what we are... Hello, Kiara! Hey, you made it, and that's important. So he goes on to... Oh, yay! Thank you! I decided to do a little bit of makeup because, I was feeling like shit. So we went over this, the idea that Middle Eastern and North African studies, Oriental studies are all lumped into one big thing. And the National Defense Education Act of 1958 established the links between social science research councils and Middle Eastern studies, and they said that studies of the Middle East and North Africa are not a center of great achievement. As a prophecy, of course, this is fairly lamentable. What makes it even more unfortunate is that Berger was commissioned not only because he was an expert on the modern Near East, but also, as is clear from the report's conclusion, because he was expected to be in a good position to predict its future. Both of Berger's main mistakes derive from the first and last paragraphs that he writes, whose genealogy is the history of Orientalism as we have been studying it. And so what he basically said was, I have... Thank you so much. What we have here is people who are writing about 50 years before this book was published. They're saying that the Middle East didn't attract scholarly attention because of its intrinsic weaknesses, but this is a duplication of the canonical Orientalist ideology. Kiara, that better not be you. Water and food, harass the Dorito. Tell him I said pss. can't see the email though. I will tell him you said pss, pss, pss. I have had water. I've had food. I cooked butter chicken today, one of my favorite meals. And I will harass the Dorito. He's been harassing me all day. But strategic economic investment was happening in the Middle East, or what we should be calling West Asia. And these investments, I figured, thank you. These kind of opinions were put out in order to further the idea that if it wasn't for Western investment, the entire region would be neglected. And without the colonizers, thank you, mediation and interpretation of what it is and all of that, the Orient was incapable of interpreting and representing itself. Without the mediation of the colonizer, firstly, the Orient would not be understood, and secondly, that it would be not worth actually going to, investing in, studying. The fact that Berger was not so much a classical Orientalist when he wrote, he was and isn't, as he was a professional sociologist, does not minimize the extent of his indebtedness to Orientalism and its ideas. Obviously, these ideas were not new. They came from the original Orientalists. It's just reiterations of the same thing in different flavors. Among those ideas is the specially legitimated antipathy towards and downgrading of the material forming the main basis of his study. So he's taking these texts, these original texts, from Asia, essentially, and saying they have no worth. So strong is this in Berger that it obscures the actualities before his eyes, and more impressively still, makes it unnecessary for him to ask himself why, if the Middle East is not a center of great cultural achievement, that he should recommend that anyone devote their life, as he has, to the study of its culture. Like, why? Why? As my nephews would say, why? Scholars, more than, say, doctors, study what they like and what interests them. Only an exaggerated sense of cultural duty drives a scholar to the study of what he does not like, what he does not think well of. I study gendered representations, especially in mainstream media, and in how people use media and what media, and how those representations play out in different forms of media. Currently writing a paper on webcam modeling and the different types of abuse, gendered abuse, that webcam models get on those platforms. And having collected the raw data from the past year. Of course, I don't like the topic of abuse, but it is important to study it because I am for gender equality and gender equity. So, of course, I don't think well of the patriarchy. But why? Absolutely. Professor Ade. I'm writing a piece on him tonight. Thank you. Yet it is such a sense of duty Orientalism has fostered because for generations the culture at large put the Orientalist at the barricades, where in his professional work he confronted the East, its barbarities, eccentricities, unruliness, and held it at bay on behalf of the West. So people who study Orientalism are essentially the guardians of Western civilization against what they call the barbaric Middle East. With the one that's making the rounds on Instagram. You didn't hear. You weren't here for the reading yesterday, when I said that Nathan Kofnes is responsible for Professor Arday's death. He is not the only thing responsible. Just by the way, I didn't. Okay, please send it to me. He's not the only one responsible. Obviously, saying that Dr. Kofnes, he's not a professor. He's a postdoctoral student. Is entirely responsible? No. It's the culture of racism in Western academia that's largely responsible, and racism in the media that is responsible. One of the journalists, I think the journalist from the Telegraph, was told that Professor Ardey was struggling with mental health issues and is at risk, and she chose to publish the article anyway. Yep. This is exactly what they were aiming for. And so, yes, please keep Professor Jason Ardey in your thoughts. And let's get rid of people like Nathan Kofnes. Saying that he is solely responsible would be saying that the genocide in Gaza is solely the cause of people like Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir. You cannot blame individuals for systemic problems, but they definitely stoke the fire. Nathan Kofnes needs to be removed. But the entire system that enabled this needs to be investigated, including the journalists. And I do think that this relates to what we're talking about here with Orientalism, in that when you are only given one point of view, when you champion one point of view over the other, like the Orientalists did with the Orient, with what they called the Orient. Yeah, he's a Ghent university. You have these incredibly racist systems that interpret the so-called truth and present themselves as the purveyors of truth. You always have violence against Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority. You will always have violence against a marginalized group. You will always have violence against the most vulnerable. And that is why Orientalism is so dangerous in its ideology. And that is how it relates to pretty much anything that is put through our media systems, our education systems, that we have this huge discrepancy between what is the actuality of the situation and what is being represented and how it's being represented and what is being said about it. What is being said about it through studies, what is being said about it through these kind of mediated, sources like Nathan Kofnes. Yep. You have an entire system of bias at play. And that is how you get the suicide of Professor Jason Ardey. When the system works so well in defense of white supremacy. And it all starts with things like this, with ideas of Orientalism. Representing the other as barbaric, representing the other as unruly, as ungovernable. That's what happens. It's a well-oiled media machine that it doesn't allow for things to slip through the cracks, as some editors have made the excuse. It has actively enabled a slow genocide of people. I mention Berger as an instance of the academic attitude towards the Islamic Orient, as an instance of how a learned perspective can support the caricatures propagated in popular culture, and that is exactly what happened with Professor Ade, is that the caricatures of people of color in academia only getting there through DEI, propagated through these kinds of ideas, these kinds of media, can be taken as seriously. Yet Berger stands also for the most current transformation overtaking Orientalism. Its conversion from a fundamentally philological discipline and a vaguely general apprehension of the Orient into a social science speciality. No longer does an Orientalist try first to master the esoteric languages of the Orient, beginning instead as a trained social scientist, and applies his science to the Orient or anywhere else. And we all know that we cannot do that. There's a specifically American contribution to the history of Orientalism that can be dated roughly from the period immediately following World War II, when the United States found itself in the position recently vacated by Britain and France. The American experience of the Orient prior to that exceptional moment was limited. Cultural isolatists like Melville were interested in it. Cynics like Mark Twain visited and wrote about it. The American transcendentalists saw affinities between Indian thought and their own. A few theologians and biblical students studied the biblical Oriental languages. There were occasional diplomatic and military encounters with Barbary pirates and the like, the odd naval expedition to the Far Orient, and of course the ubiquitous missionary to the Orient, but there was no deeply invested tradition of Orientalism, and consequently in the United States, knowledge of the Orient never passed through the refining and reticulating and reconstructing process, whose beginning was in philological study, that it went through in Europe. Furthermore, the imaginative investment was never made either, perhaps because the American frontier, the one that counted, was the westward one. Immediately after World War II, then, the Orient became not a broad Catholic issue as it had been for centuries in Europe, but an administrative one, a matter for policy. Enter the social scientist and the new expert, on whose somewhat narrower shoulders was to fall the mantle of Orientalism. And this is important because, not having gone through the same kind of history, that same kind of historical trajectory, where they had these different phases of Orientalism that we've gone through in Europe, the Americans came in and said, we know everything. Because it's us. In their turn, as we shall see, they made such changes in that it became scarcely recognizable. Isn't it what the US does with most things? Sounds about right, exactly. In any event, the new Orientalists took over the attitudes of cultural hostility and kept them. Like, oh, we'll pick this one, please. I like this idea. I'll have that. Just that. Nothing else. It's like people picking white Jesus. Evangelicals picking white Jesus. One of the striking aspects of the new American social science attention to the Orient is its singular avoidance of literature. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? You can read through reams of expert writing on the modern Near East and never encounter a single reference to literature. Hi. Thank you. What seemed to matter far more to the regional expert are quote-unquote facts, of which a literary text is perhaps a disturber. So, of course, they're not going to deal with the primary sources when the primary sources they're going to draw from are going to be killed by their bombs. Yeah. The net effect of this remarkable omission in modern American awareness of the Arab or Islamic Orient is to keep the region and its people conceptually emasculated, reduced to broad strokes, essentially, attitudes, trends, statistics. In short, dehumanized. And of course, they don't want to say, people in the US don't know that the numeric system is Arabic. Because it is much easier to dehumanize a people who are quote-unquote undeserving of attention or whatever the case may be than otherwise. Since an Arab poet or novelist, and there are many, writes of his experiences, values, humanity, however strange that may be, he effectively disrupts the various patterns, like images, cliches, and abstractions, by which the Orient is constantly represented. A literary text speaks more or less directly of a living reality, and that is why we're constantly sharing the poetry of people like Mahmoud Darwish. We are sharing the writings of Ghazan Kanafani. We are sharing the literature that comes out of Palestine, because people need a mass of people to be humanized to them through things like literature, photography, film, any sort of media representation that has the people represent themselves. And that is exactly why Orientalism was so successful, because it took away the ability of the Orient, especially the Islamic Orient, to represent itself in view of the Western mind. A literary text speaks more or less directly of a living reality. Its force is not that it is Arab, French, or English. Its force is in the power and the vitality of the words, so that, to mix in Flaubert's metaphor for La Tentation de Saint-Antoine, tip the idols out of the Orientalist arms and make them drop those great paralytic children, which are their ideas of the Orient, that attempt to pass for it. The absence of literature and the relatively weak position of philology in contemporary American studies of the Near East are mere illustrations of a new eccentricity in Orientalism, where indeed my use of the word itself is anomalous. For there is very little in what academic experts on the Near East do now that resembles traditional Orientalism, of the sort that ended with Gibb and Massignon. The main things that are reproduced are, as I said, certain cultural hostilities, a sense based not so much in philology as in expertise. Genealogically speaking, modern American Orientalism derives from such things such as the army language schools established during and after the war, sudden government and corporate interest in the non-Western world during the post-war period, Cold War competition with the Soviet Union, and a residual missionary attitude towards Orientals who are considered ripe for reform and re-education. It's Edward Saïd, Palestinian American. Also, I think we welcome. Hi, Habibi. It is Iskander.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. 'Cause yeah, I don't come here as often as I probably should. So I was like, you know what? I saw a kitty here, so I was like, I should definitely come around,
It's good
pay a
to see you.
visit. So
Good to see you, brother.
likewise.
And I'm
So
glad.
yeah, because I didn't see. Oh, it's on.
No, I'm glad to see that you're doing okay. We'll chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All of the resources that you need for the readings are in my server. Um, so these kind of attitudes towards the, the Near and Far East. Thank you. Good night. I love you. You're handsome. Mm. He's such a grouch. The fact that they considered the Orient ripe for reform and re-education clings to the original Orientalist idea that there was something inherently wrong with the Orient in the first place. It's Orientalism by Edward Saïd. And of course, as we've seen throughout the book, the West always had a problem with the one religion that posed a huge threat to Christianity, to the dominance of Christianity, and that is Islam. They were not so scared of Hinduism as they were of Islam. And we're seeing it now, where a lot of people of color who were raised in Christianity are converting to Islam. Not because they no longer believe, but because Christianity has colonized them. And they're realizing that colonization, and they're saying, you cannot take my faith in God away from me. So where do I put it? And they're putting their faith in Islam. And this is something that one of my friends is studying for her PhD. And it is absolutely fascinating how many people who were raised in Christianity, how many people of color raised in Christianity are moving towards Islam because of this very idea that Christianity pulled the wool over their eyes and enabled their colonization, the colonization of their people, and their ideological self-colonization. And they're moving towards Islam because it is, in a sense, freedom. And I find that incredibly fascinating. And I married into a Muslim family. I'm not a believer. I never will be. Unless something really huge happens in my life, I probably will never, ever believe in a higher power. But I see the appeal for somebody who already does believe. Because it is the one monotheistic religion that is warm, welcoming, the kindest people I have ever met of any of the monotheistic religions. Incredibly giving. And we only practice one pillar of Islam in this house, and that is zakat. So how this relates to Orientalism is that the West clings onto this ability to narrate the Orient for it. It's good to see you, by the way. It's good to see you, Jay. The abstraction and the obscuration, is that a word? Obscuration? Of what Islam is, of what the whole area of West Asia is so that control can be held by the West. Obfuscation, that's the word I was looking for, obfuscation. It's all strategic. Not just so that the West Asia cannot represent itself, but that in the minds of the West they can control the narrative. And that is exactly what Hasbara is. And that is why it succeeded for so long, because we didn't have access to Palestinians telling their own stories. And now we do. Yeah, I get that. The non-philological study of esoteric Oriental languages is useful for the obvious rudimentary strategic reasons, but it's also useful for giving a cachet of authority, almost a mystique, to the expert who appears to deal with hopelessly obscure material with first-hand skill. And it's one of the reasons that it was as recent as the 80s that Arabic was not offered as a language in so many Western universities. Not because of the lack of teachers, because there were teachers. They refused to teach Arabic because that was for the professionals. I do. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And so this first-hand skill was made to be a rare skill, a kind of the scarcity of knowledge presented as something only the Orientalists could do. In the social science order of things, language study is a mere tool for higher aims, certainly not for reading literary texts. Of course not. In 1958, for example, the Middle East Institute, a quasi-governmental body founded to oversee and sponsor research interest in the Middle East, produced the Report on Current Research. The contribution, Present State of Arabic Studies in the United States, done interestingly enough through a professor of Hebrew, is prefaced by an epigraph announcing that no longer is knowledge of foreign languages, for instance, the sole province of the scholar of the humanities. It is a working tool of the engineer, the economist, the social scientist, and many other specialists. The whole report stresses the importance of Arabic to oil company executives, technicians, and military personnel. But the report's main talking point is this trio of sentences. Russian universities are now producing fluent Arabic speakers. Russia has realized the importance of appealing to men through their minds, using their own language. The United States need wait no longer in developing its foreign language program. Thus, Oriental languages are part of some policy objective, as to a certain extent they always have been, or part of a sustained propaganda effort. In both these aims, the study of Oriental languages becomes the instrument carrying out Harold Lasswell's theses about propaganda, in which what counts is not what people are or think, but what they can be made to think. Oof. And while I'm reading this, think about what we have experienced over the past few years in terms of Hasbara. The propagandist outlook, in fact, combines respect for individuality with indifference to formal democracy. The respect for individuality arises from the dependence of large-scale operations upon the support of the masses and of experience within the variability of human preferences. This regard for men in the mass rests upon no democratic dogmatisms about men being the best judges of their own interests. Flitting from one alternative to the next without solid reason or clinging timorously to the fragments of some mossy rock of ages. Calculating the prospect of securing a permanent change in habit and value involves so much more than an estimation of the preferences of men in general. It means taking account of the tissue of relations in which men are webbed, searching for signs of preference which may reflect no deliberation, and directing a program toward a solution which fits the fact. With respect to those adjustments, sorry, with respect to those adjustments which do require mass action, the task of the propagandist is that of inventing gold symbols, which serve the double function of facilitating adoption and adaptation. The symbols must induce acceptance spontaneously. Spontaneously. It follows that the management ideal is the control of the situation, not by imposition, but by divination. The propagandist takes it for granted that the world is completely caused, but that it is only part predictable. Yeah, thanks. I read so much that I forget how to pronounce words. Now, were you thinking about that in terms of the hasbara that people have been victim to over years and years and years? Because this brings me to a modern ish a modern example in popular culture: Inception. Propaganda aims to make people think that the ideas that they are feeding them were their own ideas in the first place. Which is why Joseph Goebbels was so fucking good at his job. I read things about him and I'm like, firstly, he wasn't a great journalist. Secondly, he was a great propagandist. He drip-fed people the kind of information that they were already thinking, but then pushed it a little bit further each time. Just pushing the envelope a little further with each idea that he was trying to get through to people. And with that slight push each time, making people think that, oh, I already thought this. I already knew this. This is fact. And yes, that is exactly what's happening right now in the UK. I mean, Anachronista, the thing is, that has always been happening in the UK. It's always been happening in the imperial core of Europe and subsequently the US and Australia, New Zealand. That we have these tiny little bits of media that are fed to us from the time we're little, that make things so normal that it's hard to flick away those ideas. What are some of the ideas that you have that are actually old-fashioned? Like, they're actually like, you should actually get rid of those ideas. Like, they need to fuck off from your head. But you find it hard to get rid of because they're so deeply entrenched. Think about what you believe that has absolutely no value in our modern world, or like no social merit. No merit whatsoever. But you still hold on to that idea because this is something that was entrenched in you. Like when a date walks next to the cub. Yes, that is outdated. Yeah, there are way too many to think of, but I used to hang on to the idea of the nuclear family until so recently. I was a very big proponent of the nuclear family, being like, it's so bizarre. I can't explain it. Yeah, like, and now I'm anything but. I mean, do what you want, like consensually with your family, but like have partners living in the house or whatever. But this is something that I clung to right up until my 20s, my late 20s. And you would think that I wouldn't, looking at me now. But yeah, I was a very big proponent of the nuclear family. I do still believe that you should have, like, these old ideas of you should have a siesta in the middle of the day. Yeah, I still believe that, but that is actually good for you. And I still believe that we should have dessert. You should have dessert after every meal. But it all stems from propaganda. It all stems from this idea that society should be a certain way, that society should have a certain modus operandi. And when I look back at all of the things that I used to think that Islam was oppressive, embarrassingly so. Because, of course, everything that I was learning at school and at university was geared towards those ideas. My education was incredibly westernized. Hi, Finn. Until I had to break those habits. Yeah, I'll be okay. How are you? How are you feeling? I used to believe that Christians were loving and the most moral. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people used to, or a lot of people still believe that Christians are loving and moral. They're as moral as the IOF, yeah. My boyfriend made me some amazing tomato soup. Aww, I'm glad. But yeah, it's the role of propaganda. I get that, Cass. I completely understand it. And I look at people who are like, oh, I understand how hard it is being a woman. I finally understood how hard it is being a woman when I had daughters. Or like how important safety to women is when I had daughters. I'm like, bitch, firstly, there's your wife right there. You're telling me that you didn't. And secondly, how have you been showing respect to the other women and femmes in your life if you only realized when you had daughters? You don't respect your mother enough. Exactly. This book was described as pugnacious by the Observer. And I think it's quite fitting because, like, this ideological creation of Orientalism enabled colonial administrations, to deal with the otherness of the East through their own interpretation of culture and beliefs and customs. And these Orientalists were propagandists. True. Oh, I don't want somebody with this kind of body count. Like, bitch, please, I'll have enough cops in my in the trunk of my car as I want. Thanks. But there's this the Orientalists were propagandists. But through these imaginative depictions of their skewed sense of reality, they managed to put forth one of the most destructive propaganda campaigns of all time, and that is demonizing the brown person, demonizing the black person, demonizing the indigenous person, demonizing anybody who was different, but also demonizing Palestinians, specifically by that pinkwashing, demonizing the religion, and Saïd, being an American Palestinian or Palestinian American, he understands so intricately what that kind of propaganda means in the West, and how these ideas are not just a reflection of Western imperialism, but the practice of imperialism and racism at work. And that is the ultimate propaganda of Orientalism. Yeah. But how they use the language of the oppressed, how they use the language of the marginalized to further these ideas, how people have demonized the word woke. The fuck? So, yes, when Laswell writes about propaganda, in the sense, he is also writing about Orientalism, because that drip feeding of norms and certain untruths about society that are presented as truths, it becomes your everyday. It becomes your entrenched belief in the nuclear family. It becomes your internalized belief that Islam is dangerous to women. It is your belief that you cannot be queer and Muslim. It can also lead to the belief, as many people believe, that people from the Orient are not capable of ruling themselves, are not capable of education, are not capable of independent thought. And it goes on to the idea that because the Western state of Israel is now there, because Palestinians are Orients, so to speak, because they cannot educate themselves, because they cannot represent themselves, because they cannot do X, Y, and Z, they're not capable of A, B, and C, they deserve to die? That's where it starts. Propaganda. The acquired foreign language is therefore made part of a subtle assault upon populations, just as the study of a foreign region like the Orient is turned into a program for control by divination. Yet such programs must always have a liberal veneer, and usually this is left to scholars, men of goodwill, enthusiasts, to attend to. The idea encouraged is in studying Orientals, Muslims or Arabs, that we can get to know other people. their way of life, their thoughts, and so on. To this end, it is always better to let them speak for themselves, to represent themselves, even though underlying this fiction stands Marx's phrase, with which Laswell is in agreement for Louis Napoleon: they cannot represent themselves, they must be represented. But only up to a point, and in a special way. In 1973, during the anxious days of the October Arab-Israeli War, the New York Times Magazine commissioned 2 articles, one representing the Israeli and the other the Arab side of the conflict. The Israeli side was presented by an Israeli lawyer, the Arab side by an American former ambassador to an Arab country, who had no formal training in Oriental studies. Lest we jump immediately into the simple conclusion that the Arabs were believed incapable of representing themselves, we would do well to remember that both Arabs and Jews in this instance were Semites, in the broad cultural designation represented for a Western audience. It's worthwhile here to remember the passage from Proust, in which the sudden appearance of the Jew into an aristocratic salon is described as follows: "The Romanarians, Egyptians, Turks may hate the Jews, but in a French drawing room the differences between those people are not so apparent, and an Israelite making his entry, though he were emerging from the heart of the desert, body crouching like hyena, neck thrust obliquely forward, spreading himself in proud salams, completely satisfied a certain taste for the Oriental." Cultural relations policies, though. While it's true to say that the United States did not in fact become a world empire until the 20th century, it's also true that during the 19th, the US was concerned with the Orient in ways that prepared for its later, overtly imperial concern. Leaving aside the campaigns against the Barbary pirates in 1801 and 1815, let's consider the founding of the American Oriental Society in 1842. At its first annual meeting in 1843, its president, John Pickering, made the very clear point that America proposed for itself the study of the Orient in order to follow the example of the imperial European powers. Pickering's message was that the framework of Oriental studies, then and now, was political, not simply scholarly. Note the following summary, how the lines of argument for Orientalism leave little room to doubt as to their intention. At the first annual meeting of the American Society in 1843, President Pickering began a remarkable sketch of the field it was proposed to cultivate by calling attention to the especially favorable circumstances of the time, the peace that reigned everywhere, the freer access to Oriental countries, and the greater facilities for communication. The earth seemed quiet in the days of Metternich and Louis Philippe. The Treaty of Nanking had opened Chinese ports. The screw propeller had been adopted in ocean-going vessels. Morse had completed his telegraph and already suggested the laying of transatlantic cable. The objects of the society were to cultivate learning in Asiatic, African, and Polynesian language, and in everything concerning the Orient, to create a taste for Oriental studies in the country, to publish texts, translations, and communications, and to collect a library and cabinet. Most of the work has been done in the Asiatic field, particularly in Sanskrit and Semitic languages. Make no bones about it. They were looking for domination right from the start. And I've been going for an hour? Jeez. Actually, yeah, I'm going to stop there for today. Any questions? I know Beans is deafened on my side. I don't know the context of what you're speaking, Finn, but I'm glad you're here. Yeah, Cass, you're welcome every week. Thanks, Beans. My comments and stuff are not working on Twitch. I don't know what's going on. Oh, okay. Oh, hi, JJ. It's good to see you. Yeah, so any questions, feel free to message me, to pop into the Discord, say hi. I love you too, Kiara, and you are beautiful too. And I am so grateful for all of you. Tomorrow is going to be a very, very tough day considering what day it is, or the date at least. So it is an anniversary of something very, very difficult. And okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm glad I'm glad we have community. I'm just so glad. So I'm going to say gute Nacht to Twitch and YouTube, and I shall see you all tomorrow for the hot mess that is hot hot feminism. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to handle this book, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, see you tomorrow.